Welcome to the School of Wisdom, a weekly podcast produced for the Bible Bistro, studying the book of Proverbs chapter by chapter. My son, hear the instruction of your father. Forsake not the law of your mother, for they shall be an ornament of grace to your head, and chains about your neck. Now, this week's lesson. Hey there, friends. Welcome back to the School of Wisdom podcast in the Bible Bistro. Today we're going to look at chapter 19 in the book of Proverbs. We are actually in the dining room of the Bible Bistro today. You might hear some sounds that are a little bit different, a fan in the background, maybe some outside noises. I have the window open here beside me. The chime on the fan, you can probably hear that every now and then as it clinks and chinks. I have to apologize that this is late. Anticipating it to be a little bit late because I was traveling this week, but then today my computer had a meltdown and decided that it wasn't going to work. So we'll have to see if I make it all the way through this podcast today without the thing freezing up. So hopefully I'm through with those issues and everything is going to go smoothly. We're talking about chapter 19 today in the book of Proverbs, which I would like to call the poor man's chapter. We've had other chapters that seemed thematic. The chapter that featured the Lord's name so much. It was all about Him, basically. There's been chapters that have featured the fool, and chapters that have featured money, and chapters that have featured, of course, the strange woman, and those areas, those issues, and wisdom itself. But this one seems to feature the poor man, and you'll see that as we go through here. I've divided this up into 3 sections with an introduction. So you'll notice that as you look at the outline, and if you need an outline, please go to my-dailydose.com. You can go to the blog. On the blog, you'll find different entries that'll say outline for Proverbs chapter, and then it'll have whatever chapter there that you're looking for. Just go there, download that outline. You'll see a link in the little blog description for you to click on. It'll give you a PDF. And then you can print that out, or you can use it online, however you want to use it. Download it to your machine and use it on your machine or on your handheld, or however you like to look at PDFs. But it's right there, it's free, and it's just for you. So if you have the outline, you'll see that we've divided this into 3 parts. This is my division. I did not go to Dr. Tate this week. I did look at his commentary, but I decided I'd stay with my own division here. But again, this is the poor man's chapter. And let me read for you verses 1 and 2. This is what I would like to call the introduction. Better is the poor that walketh in his integrity than he that is perverse in his lips and is a fool. Also, that the soul be without knowledge, it is not good. And he that hasteth with his feet sinneth. You'll notice that as we look at this 19th chapter, we begin with a better than statement about the poor. Now, let's not forget that when we talk about the poor man, we're not just talking about someone who is depressed economically. That's usually what we think of when we think of poor. But when we come to the Bible, we need to keep in the back of our minds the highest level of the poor is what Jesus gave us in the Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So the poor in spirit is a theme that runs throughout the Old and New Testament. We find it in the Psalms, we find it in Proverbs, we find it in the New Testament. The poor in spirit is the person who has humbled himself before the Lord. They're broken, they're contrite. They see nothing good in themselves. Therefore, they call on the Lord. They cry out to Him. They pursue Him and seek Him with their whole heart. That's the poor man. Really, he's not poor. It has nothing to do with economics. It has everything to do with the economics of the soul, not economics of finance, but the economics of the soul. So the poor man is poor indeed because he sees his poverty in the light of God's great, gracious wealth. And so today we come to this poor man's chapter, and we start right away with, better is the poor that walketh in his integrity. Well, we've seen things like this said in the Psalter previously, haven't we? For example, better is a dry morsel and quietness therewith than a house full of sacrifices and contention. So better than has been used in other places, or better is. Here it is again, and I'm going to post very soon a listing of all these better than, better is statements in the Proverbs. So you'll find that on the blog here in a couple of days. Better is the poor that walks in his integrity than he that is perverse in his lips and is a fool. Of course, we know the danger of foolishness. A man would rather be met by a bear robbed of her cubs than a fool in his foolishness. So you don't want to mess with the fool. He is a hot mess and dangerous. Well, here the poor man walking in his integrity is better than that. He's better than a fool that's perverse in his lips. Of course he is, because he has integrity, while a fool doesn't. He's perverse in not only his lips, but in all of his ways. Verse 3 begins the first full section here, 3 through 10. So we have these verses that set up for us, these 8 verses that set up for us the foolishness of a man. And we begin with that very statement there in verse 3, which is why I've called this section, Foolishness of Man. The foolishness of man perverteth his way, and his heart fretteth against the Lord. Wealth maketh many friends, but the poor is separated from his neighbor. A false witness shall not be unpunished, and he that speaketh lies shall not escape. Many will entreat the favor of the prince, and every man is a friend to him that giveth gifts. All the brethren of the poor do hate him. How much more do his friends go far from him? He pursueth them with words, yet they are wanting to him. He that getteth wisdom loveth his own soul. He that keepeth understanding shall find good. A false witness shall not be unpunished, and he that speaketh lies shall perish. Delight is not seemly for a fool, much less for a servant to have rule over princes. Well, that's the first section, verses 3 through 10. You'll notice the poor man features prominently in this section. We have him twice. Wealth maketh many friends, but the poor is separated from his neighbor. Now, that doesn't tell us anything about the character of the poor man, but what it does tell us is that the poor man here, economically distressed, is different than the man who has money, because the man with money has friends. He has friends only because he has money. The poor man is separated from his neighbor because the neighbor doesn't want to deal with the issues of a man who has a lot of need. He doesn't want to help him. He doesn't want to give to him. So a poor man, automatically people will look at the poor man and they'll say, well, he's trouble. There's a prejudice really against the poor in that sense, which is why I think we don't really pick up on poor in spirit as being a good thing. We don't look for it. We don't actually seek it for ourselves, which we should. And then the poor man is mentioned there again in verse 7. All the brethren of the poor do hate him. Now, again, I think you need to have in the back of your head the Beatitudes, because the poor man here very well could be that man that is poor in spirit, because all the brethren of the poor do hate him. So in a family where one comes to know the Lord Jesus in the pardon of his sin, here in that family, they're going to hate him. How much more do his friends go far from him? Because once you turn to Christ, you're going to lose a lot of friends. But you're going to gain a brand new family in the church. He pursues them with words, yet they are wanting to him. I remember this happening to me when I was first born again. I had a lot of friends that I did a lot of things with, and I really wanted them to know Christ too, so I was pursuing them with words. I was trying to get them to believe in the Lord Jesus, but that was vain because I was not ready to share the gospel yet. All I knew was my experience, and I was very zealous, and they were very put off by me. And so I pursued them with words, yet they were wanting to me. Still to this day, many of them are wanting to me, simply because I turned to Christ. He that getteth wisdom loveth his own soul. We've seen that before, haven't we? And we can go back to chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, and find, the instruction. With all you're getting, get wisdom, and while you're doing it, get understanding along with it. So if you do get wisdom, you're really loving your own soul. Again, here is soul care outlined for us by the proverb writer. And we go on to the second division here, the discretion of a man. And that phrase begins in verse 11. Now we're going to read down from verse 11 all the way down to verse 21. So we have 11 verses here. We had 8 in the first section, 11 in the second section. We're going to have 8 again in the third section. So a really nice division the writer gives us in this particular chapter. The discretion of a man defers his anger, and it is his glory to pass over a transgression. The king's wrath is as the roaring of a lion, but his favor is as dew upon the grass. Is the calamity of his father, and the contentions of a wife are a continual dropping. House and riches are the inheritance of fathers, and a prudent wife is from the Lord. Slothfulness casteth into a deep sleep, and an idle soul shall suffer hunger. He that keepeth the commandment keepeth his own soul, but he that despiseth his ways shall die. He that hath pity upon the poor lendeth unto the Lord, and that which he hath given will he pay him again. Why don't we stop there at verse 17 just for right now, because here we have another one of our poor man statements. This time, it's not the poor man that's being spoken of. This time, it happens to be those that help the poor. So he that has pity on the poor lends to the Lord. So this suggests that the poor man is economically depressed. He needs something. And so the Lord is actually providing for the poor man. Why? Because the poor man can only cry out to the Lord and receive an audience. You can't receive it from your brethren. You can't receive it from your neighbors. We've already been told that up there in verse 7. Verse 4 also lets us know that the poor is separated from his neighbor, so they're not anywhere around. So the only place a poor man can go is to the Lord. And so when someone gives to the poor, they're actually lending to the Lord. And what does it say here? Looks like there is some recompense, some sort of payback. That which he hath given will he pay him again. So the Lord takes care to bless those that bless the Lord, that bless the poor, because the poor man knows who to call on. He's calling on the Lord, and the Lord is taking what is given and multiplying it to those in need. Verse 18, chasten thy son while there is hope, and let not thy soul spare for his crying. A man of great wrath shall suffer punishment, for if thou deliver him, yet thou must do it again. Hear counsel and receive instruction, that thou mayest be wise in thy latter end. There are many devices in a man's heart, nevertheless the counsel of the Lord, that shall stand. So many good things here. Chasten thy son while there is hope. They're young. They need chastising. They need instruction. They need foolishness driven far from them. How do you do that? You chasten them. And however you might want to do that. I mean, it's that here in this proverb, we have chasten thy son left wide open. There's lots of ways we can chasten our children, and we have to do it so that they learn. Do it while there's hope, while he or she is still young. And don't let thy soul spare because of the crying. You know, sometimes they cry and we think, ooh, did I do the right thing? Well, they're going to cry anyway. So better that they cry now than later in life find out they didn't learn the lesson they should have learned from their father or their mother because, you know, they were crying and we didn't want to make them upset. Well, somebody and something's going to make them upset. Better for them to learn these lessons at home when they're young than to learn later on and someone count them as fools. A man of great wealth, or wrath, rather, read that wrong, didn't I? A man of great wrath shall suffer punishment. For if thou deliver him, yet thou must do it again. So wrath is not a thing that we want to have characterize us. And if you're already there as an adult, you really need to work on that because it's just going to bring you back time and again to chastisement. Get rid of the wrath. There are many devices in a man's heart. Nevertheless, the counsel of the Lord, that shall stand. We come up with all kinds of ideas for all kinds of things, don't we? We have a purpose and a plan for all manner of things. And yet, it's the Lord's plans. Those are the ones that are going to stand. His counsel is the thing that's going to last. Oh, and guess what? It's going to outlast you, too. It's going to be around much longer than any of us. The Lord's counsel is eternal. It is firmly established in the heavens. And then we come to the third section here in verses 22 through 29. I call this the desire of a man. And we begin this section with that phrase. The desire of a man is his kindness, and a poor man is better than a liar. The fear of the Lord tendeth to life, and he that hath it shall abide satisfied. He shall not be visited with evil. A slothful man hideth his hand in his bosom, and will not so much as bring it to his mouth again. Smite a scorner, and the simple will beware. And reprove one that hath understanding, and he will understand knowledge. He that wasteth his father and chaseth away his mother is a son that causes shame and brings reproach. Cease, my son, to hear the instruction that causes to err from the words of knowledge. An ungodly witness scorneth judgment, and the mouth of the wicked devours iniquity. Judgments are prepared for scorners, and stripes for the back of fools. We begin here in verse 22, and we have another poor man statement. So we have the poor man showing up in all three of these different divisions of the chapter. The poor man is better than a liar. The desire of a man is his kindness, and a poor man is better than a liar. Why is that? Because a poor man, remember the very first proverb, verse 1, the better is the poor that walks in his integrity than he that is perverse in his lips and is a fool. So we have the fool there in verse 1. Here we have in verse 22 a liar. Poor man is better than a liar because if he's walking in his integrity, if this is a poor man because he's poor in spirit, then he's going to be walking in his integrity, and his lips will betray that. The fear of the Lord tendeth to life. Now here is another one of those places where we see the 10 conditions. We've seen the 10 conditions several times actually in this chapter. Let me point this one out. The fear of the Lord. Remember that was our 9th condition in the 10 conditions. The fear of the Lord tends to life. We've seen the fear of the Lord is the pathway to knowledge. It's the pathway to wisdom. It's the pathway to understanding. The fear of the Lord here is a pathway also to life. And this is not something that we've not seen. This is not the first time we've had this. We go back into the chapters that we've covered and we can see the fear of the Lord connected to right living and life itself. Again, we have the prospect of death and life in this chapter. A slothful man hideth his hand in his bosom and will not so much as bring it to his mouth again. Dr. Marvin Tate, in his commentary, calls these proverbs observations. This is one of those observations. It's just a truth. You see a slothful man, and he's just going to be so lazy that he can't hardly even bring his hand to his mouth. Smite a scorner, and the simple will beware. Understand knowledge. Again, an observation. He that wastes father and chases away his mother is a son that causes shame and brings reproach. Another observation. And isn't this a horrible one? It's horrible to say that a man that wastes father and chases away his mother is going to be this way. I mean, that's just awful. What a breach of the 5th commandment. You know, in the 5th commandment, we're commanded to honor our father and our mother. Here we have just a breach of that commandment altogether. Cease, my son, to hear the instruction that causes to err from the words of knowledge. There is an instruction, ladies and gentlemen, that will destroy the learning of the young if they're not careful. And we need to be careful to keep them from it, to have them cease from hearing that instruction. An ungodly witness scorns judgment. Well, there we know that if they're ungodly, then they're probably a scorner to start with. And if they don't accept the Lord's judgment, how can we even begin to imagine that they would accept our judgment? And then finally, in verse 29, judgments are prepared for scorners and stripes for the back of fools. So you'll notice how 28 and 29 go nicely together. All right, well, I hope you'll join me again next week, and we'll pick up with Proverbs chapter 20. I hope you'll join me then on the School of Wisdom podcast. Hey, thanks for listening to the School of Wisdom podcast. If you're listening to this over YouTube, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so that you'll be notified every time one of these podcasts is uploaded. I really appreciate all my followers, and I try to respond to each and every one of your questions. Come again next week, and we'll enjoy another lesson in the School of Wisdom.